Hello and welcome to Best of the Rest. Normally, this is a show where we take a second look at movies that were poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. This week, however, we're talking about the brand new film Glass Onion. By all accounts, a very well-received film. This is a bonus episode that we like to call Best of the Best. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Andrew Williams. Andrew, are you ready to talk about this one?
I am so ready to talk about this one.
Man, so ready. For context, we saw this film in theaters. I believe both of us saw it independently on Thanksgiving Day. There was a limited week-long theatrical release, and Andrew and I, both being huge fans of Knives Out, knew we had to catch this as soon as possible. I know I'm kind of speaking for you, Andrew, but I feel pretty confident we're on the same page there, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just told you before we started recording that the first movie, I was just smiling like a doofus the entire time I was watching it. And the minute they announced Netflix was going to distribute it instead, there was an immediate ping of just like, oh man, I really hope I can watch this in a theater, just because that seems like such a waste to not be able to watch this on the big screen. And thankfully, Rian Johnson did the impossible. He got all of the theater chains to work with Netflix for the widest release for a Netflix film ever. So pretty gosh darn impressive, if you ask me.
Yeah, that is awesome. And I even have a attachment to, I mean, this isn't exactly the type of movie you think of, like, oh man, you gotta see that on the big screen. Right? It's relatively low stakes detective stuff as opposed to like superhero or action. But Knives Out was the last movie I saw in theaters before the lockdown. I saw it a couple times in theaters. I took different people to go see it over and over again. And I just, there is a kind of attachment to the theatrical experience in this type of movie and watching how things play out and then seeing it with other people, and like checking their face as things are revealed and stuff, and the audience reaction and stuff. So it really, you know, I in my mind, I relate this type of movie, the series, with the theatrical experience. So yeah, super glad I got to see it in theaters like that.
Yep.
And we're going to, of course, spoil the movie. We're going to do what we always do, talk about our favorite parts and favorite performances, hand out a Mark Strong Award, and best scene. Let's set the stage a little bit. We've talked a little bit about Knives Out already. I will say I remember seeing the trailer for Knives Out. In fact, I think you shared it. You're like, this looks awesome. And I watched the trailer. And from that trailer, I was like, I'm going to love this movie. I mean, this cast is insane. The tone feels right up my alley. I'm personally, we'll talk about Rian Johnson a little bit more in a minute. I wasn't necessarily a huge Rian Johnson fan. I was seen most of his movies, liked a few, but that's not really what attracted me to the movie. It was that cast, that tone, that feel. Love Daniel Craig. And I had such high expectations for Knives Out, and it exceeded them in theaters, which is pretty rare to be that hyped for a movie, and it still goes beyond expectations.
Yep.
Knives Out, probably my favorite film of 2019, and it's up there on my all-time favorites list. How about you, Andrew?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I've been a Rian Johnson fan for a long time. Like I said, we'll talk about him a little bit more. But like from Last Jedi to Knives Out to even, like I said, the things he's done before, I've always been a pretty big fan. And Knives Out is just checking, like it was like really liked Rian Johnson. That's the first check. It's a murder mystery. There's our second check. Like there's a big mansion, beautiful cast, fantastic group of people all working together. Like there was just so many boxes for me to get checked. Like it's been well established, I think, on a lot of forums that I am a big murder mystery guy. Like I love murder mysteries. I've got pretty much every book Agatha Christie ever wrote on my shelf back here behind me. It's pretty deep. And so to have one of your favorite writer-directors come out and say that he's doing a murder mystery, I was like, well, this is, what a time to be alive. And so
everything I wanted.
So I was really, really hyped when Knives Out came out. Like I said, I was smiling so much the first time I was watching it. Like I said, saw it a bunch of times. I think I legit saw that in theaters 4 or 5 times. Just like literally, it would be like Wednesday night, and I'd be like, nothing else to do, let's go watch Knives Out again. Like it was just genuinely going back again and again and again. And so whenever the first thing when it came out is that there's that piece of my brain that was like, man, it's a new thing. It's not playing on anything anybody knows. I just really hope it's successful. There's been so many other movies where I was like, it had all the keys for success and it didn't quite happen. So I really was hoping that Knives Out was going to be successful. And thankfully, it was. It was super successful, made a bunch of money off a relatively modest budget. It's definitely fitting that notion of like the $30 to $40 million quote unquote blockbuster. That's something that we both, I think, have kind of lamented doesn't really exist anymore.
Right.
And so this is kind of fitting into that genre of high budget, but not ridiculous. So it made like, I think it cost $30 million and it made like over $450 million. So a big success in that regard. And then, yeah, so when they announced, I think Lionsgate initially announced they would greenlit a sequel, and then eventually Netflix acquired them, and we already know Netflix has got the rights to another one. So, I was pretty hyped for Knives Out. It's definitely one of my favorites. It's one of those things I put on pretty much any time, and I'm just happy to keep living in that universe.
1000%. Now let's talk about the build to Glass Onion. Like you said, early on, like shortly after Knives Out is released, Rian Johnson is like, I've got ideas for more of these, continuing with Benoit Blanc, doing other stories. And so from jump, he teased the idea of a sequel. It was greenlit shortly afterwards. Then boom, pandemic hits, right? Lockdown hits. And then we get the news about Netflix, which at the time made a lot of sense. But by the time this Glass Onion comes out, theaters are basically back at full production. There's not quite as many theatrical release movies as there once was, but by all means, they are all open. I mean, a wide theatrical release could have happened. So it ended up in this very strange place where, even in the movie, I feel like Rian Johnson felt like he had to acknowledge the pandemic and lockdown, but you could have took those elements out of this movie and not changed a thing, right? But it kind of came in this like middle area, but I was cautiously optimistic from the beginning. As much as I love Knives Out, so much of my love for that is that cast and that story and the layers to it. And the idea of starting from scratch, only Benoit Blanc continuing and just a whole new supporting cast. I was like, I don't know. That's like, sounds like capturing lightning in a bottle for a second time. How are you going to assemble a second cast? And I did not watch trailers for this. I didn't run out of theaters if they played or anything, but I don't think I ever saw one playing in the theater. And I made it a point. I didn't seek any out. I didn't want to learn too much about it, but I saw the poster. I saw the initial tease. The first tease that Rian Johnson tweeted out was literally a GIF of the cast getting onto the boat and they all turn their head. Just beautiful, beautiful stuff.
Yeah.
So it had me hyped, but again, cautiously optimistic. Can he do this again with a whole new cast? So that was kind of my hype level going in. Like I wanted to like it, but there was always a doubt in the back of my mind until I saw the movie. How about you, Andrew?
It was interesting because I remember when they announced there was going to be a quote unquote sequel, the first thought for a lot of people was like, well, how can you go back to that? Like what, the immediate thought for so many people was just, oh, like why are we going to go back to the Thrombies again? What could happen to them again that we would care about? And for me, it seemed like a no-brainer. It's like, well, it's not going to be about the Thrombies. It's just going to be Blanc investigating a new case. Because that's like, people seemed confused by that. And it was a little interesting. It's like, Blanc investigating a new case is, like, to me, one of the most logical things you could do. Like, he's the investigator. But, like, Hercule Poirot, none of his books are, quote-unquote, sequels to the others. They're just new mysteries. And the same with Miss Marple or any of those characters. Even, you look at Jack Reacher, characters like that. Sometimes it builds, but very rarely and more often, these are standalone things that are very much just a new case with this guy. And if you've read the stuff before, you have a little bit more insight into him. But I was just like, oh, we're just gonna have a new mystery. And so
But that is a bit of a dated concept if you think about it. I mean, you're referencing like Agatha Christie books and stuff, but
I mean, Jack Reacher's new. That concept of the standalone thriller is not particularly
Yes, but think about the movies, right? I mean, you could say the 007 series, right, is this one repeating character, a new supporting cast, but Daniel Craig's 007, the most recent one, was not like that. It was a continuation. The Jack Reacher movies are a direct sequel. I mean, you don't really have that type of movie being made currently. Like, not only do we not get the $30 to $40 million pictures, but we're not getting that anthology series type movie that feels a little bit like a dated concept.
Yeah, we've gotten it a little bit more on television lately, like things like American Horror Story, American Crime Story. You start getting that anthology series where it's like, okay, this is 8 episodes of this story, and then we're moving on to the
Yeah.
next thing. And you get that a little bit more there. But yeah, that it and it's even wrong to kind of call it an anthology. It's a very strange space because it's not really an anthology because it's still the same character, but it's not really a sequel to what happened before. It's actually something that's kind of hard to quantify. Like I struggle to think of another cinematic example outside maybe the original series of James Bond. But yeah, it's either way. It sits in a weird space. And Chris, what was your question?
I think this concept is a dated
Yes,
concept, not in any kind of
no,
bad way, but
but
I
but the
don't think.
idea more so just of can they do it again? That idea of
Right,
lightning in a
right.
bottle. That I think that's a fair assumption because that first cast is like you said, it's stacked. It is, you've got Captain America's in that movie. There's a
Yeah,
ridiculous amount of star power in that movie. Laurie Strode, Don Johnson, like just this who's who. But like, and again, you kind of go back to like Sidney Lumet made Murder on the Orient Express back in the '70s, and it was a very similar idea of just we're going to cast this all-star who's who in this kind of super classic murder mystery because Murder on the Orient Express is one of those classic. It's been around forever, but it's a gamble regardless because, like you said, is the success of the first one. It's the sum of its parts. Like it's a great script, yes, and it's great direction and it's a great look, but you can't discount what that cast all brought to the table. And so, yeah, can you do that again? Can you find another group of people that are going to be able to do that just as well? Like, yeah, you can get another talented group of people, but is it going to work as well? And I think that's a fair question because it is a Herculean task to get a cast that isn't just all good, but just all works together and has that chemistry and is effective. And obviously, we'll talk about it more. But I think you nailed it. Really.
Well, let's talk about the creative team. This should be a pretty simple one because it's basically just Rian Johnson. He is the writer and director, even a producer this time around, and the entire creative force. So I mentioned it a little earlier. Like I'm not a huge Rian Johnson. I guess I am now, to be fair. But like when Knives Out was coming out, so I've seen most of his films, and Looper didn't grab me like it grabbed a lot of people. Brick I saw back in the day. I saw sometime in high school, and it just did not work for me. It started his long working relationship with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and it's basically like a neo-noir detective story, but it's set in modern day high school, but they all talk like they're in the 1920s, and it seemed a little too cute for me. It just didn't work. So his movies were always just kind of a mixed bag for me. However, Star Wars: The Last Jedi, my favorite Star Wars movie. I love that movie, and impressively, I just had to double check this. He is the sole writer on that movie. It's a
He
huge
is.
franchise film, and we all know about how they created those sequels. A little bit controversial to some people, but he is the sole writer on that, which I think is pretty gosh darn impressive. Sole writer on Knives Out as well, and again here for Glass Onion. So I seem to like this guy more and more with every movie. He's definitely on my must see his next film list at this point.
He is actually, I think, an elite company of director that he is the sole writer on every film he's done.
That's
There
wild.
is not a single film he has written that does not have somebody else credited as a writer. And I think he's no, George Lucas wrote and directed the prequels. Never mind, Andrew. That's a dumb thing to say. But I was going to say, I don't know if George Lucas had sole writing credit on any of the Star Wars movies, though. That's what I was not sure about. Because I know J.J. Abrams co-wrote Rise of Skywalker too. But yeah, it's still nuts that he just manages to be so creative. And I do want to give a shout out to his producing partner, Ram Bergman, who has also been a producer on every single film he's done, so kind of been along with him the whole way. And I do want to count out that he also directed 3 episodes of Breaking Bad. These are actually probably some of the only things that he's not written that he's directed. including Fly, 51, and Ozymandias, which are routinely listed as 3 of the best episodes of Breaking Bad. And yeah, he's fantastic. I really like his movies. I would maybe revisit Brick if you haven't seen it in a long time. I think it's definitely a little rough around the edges, but I think there's a lot of stuff, especially if you go now, you can see a lot of that DNA early on, and I think it's an interesting thing to kind of watch his evolution. And Brothers Bloom, which I don't think you mentioned, that's just a fun little caper movie starring Rachel Weisz, Adrian Brody, and Mark Ruffalo, which 3 beautiful people. How are you going to go wrong?
I do own it. It's one of those classic. I own it. I haven't watched it, so I will have to check that out. But Andrew, what do you say we jump into talking about this movie, though?
I suppose. No time like the present, Chris.
This movie, Glass Onion, which that's all I'm going to call it. The movie's called Glass Onion. That's what it says on the title card in the movie itself. Quick negative before we jump into the positive. I hate Glass Onion, a Knives Out mystery. It makes no sense. Knives Out is Knives Out. Glass Onion is Glass Onion. Is the next one going to also be a Knives Out mystery? Like the title of the first story becomes a... I hate it. Go ahead.
The only thing I'll say, and I think you were just about to say it, is like they want to create the linkage so that people know, it's related to that. And don't get me wrong, I hate it too, but on a base level, I understand it. But I was glad that in the movie, the title card is simply Glass Onion. It does not bog itself down. But yeah, it's one of those things where it's like, on that one level, it's like, yes, I understand. But can you just treat us like we're a little bit smarter than you think we are for once, please?
I think putting on the poster from the writer and director of Knives Out does the same thing, right?
I think that would be fair. Yeah.
Anyway, hashtag PP, all positives here on out about this movie, Glass Onion. Let's go ahead and start with the cast, and you know what we're going to do. We're going to start with the high point, the best casting, the best performance of the film, because every episode we recognize one person goes above and beyond the Call of Duty, that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance. We recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, you're going to kick this off for us, because this is a toughie.
This is a doozy.
Who is getting your Mark Strong Award for Glass Onion? And if you want to retroactively do Knives Out, feel free to do so.
Knives Out's dude. Knives Out, I might give it to Christopher Plummer. Just because
wow.
I really like Christopher Plummer in that movie. And interestingly, it's one of the interesting things is that a lot of people that I know saw Knives Out said that like Daniel Craig was their least favorite part of it. Like I thought that was an interesting thing to hear, that like they liked they didn't like hate him or anything, but they just thought the rest of the cast was all showing up so much more. Like given these much more flamboyant personalities that made them stand out a little bit more than Blanc was. Which I don't think is the case with this movie. I think Benoit Blanc is front and center in this one, and it's awesome. But so yeah, I think I'll go back. I love Christopher Plummer. Can't go wrong with Christopher Plummer. And I'm not going to feel bad about giving it to Daniel Craig, because I am going to give it to Daniel Craig for Glass Onion.
Okay,
fantastic. I think that there is a lot of people competing for this. Every single performance here. This is something that I've kind of pointed out about his movies in the past, but like, and it's even true. One of the things that I love about Last Jedi, and I know this is a controversial thing, everybody in that movie has an arc. Every single character that you see for more than 30 seconds has an arc. From Leia to Poe, Finn, Rey, everybody. Everybody has an arc. Rose has an arc. Holdo has an arc. Everybody does something and has a purpose, and it all factors. Knives Out is very similar. Some of the characters are a little bit more minor, but almost all of the adults have some kind of arc that the finale of the movie kind of sets them up for somehow. This movie is very similar, where like everybody has something to do. Everybody is playing a role. Nobody is immaterial except Daryl, which we'll talk about later.
But that is the joke. But yes, we will talk about that later.
It is. But Noah Segan making his cameo here. Yeah. So I'm gonna go Daniel Craig, because unlike Knives Out, where I think you could argue that he's kind of background maybe to some of the characters, that is not really the case here, and I think the movie is all the better for it. Not that I think Knives Out suffers from that, but I I just loved his introductory scene. We'll talk about that more later. I was just laughing so much where we see him the first time in this movie. His part in this, he takes like a much more forceful role. I just love everything about it. He plays off of all these characters well. There's subplots here that are oddly timely for our current times that are more relevant now than they would have been when this movie was written. But I love everything he's doing. I think it is fantastic. I think he really has, honestly, if Daniel Craig just played Benoit Blanc for the rest of his life, I don't think he or I would have a problem with that. So
no, not at all. If they make enough of these movies, is it going to be a thing? Like, is he more known for Benoit Blanc or James Bond? That might be a discussion in the future.
It might be, especially if there's like this consistent through line and the Knives Out movies like keep crushing it. But yeah. Anyway, so Daniel Craig is Benoit Blanc. That is getting my Mark Strong for Glass Onion.
Excellent choice. I can't imagine anybody being upset with that. For Knives Out, I would give it to Daniel Craig as Benoit Blanc. So I think it's. I hear what you're saying about some people's maybe complaints about it, but
most people are wrong, Chris. It's fine.
And Knives Out, I agree with everybody's giving an insanely good performance. You could tell me anybody in that movie gets your Mark Strong award, and I'll be like, yeah sure. I mean,
Anna de Armas, Chris Evans, Jamie Lee Curtis, Michael Shannon, any of them.
Greatest actor of all time, Michael Shannon's in that movie. Like it's so good. But I got to give it to him because, and I'll tell you the scene that does it for me, because I like him throughout the movie, but maybe when you first the early scenes, you're like, okay, he's kind of just a blank slate detective. His quirk is he has a funny Southern accent, and that's all there is to him. But by the time you get to some later scenes, the two things that really sell me is one, where he says, "It compels me though," because like what feeds him is the mystery, and it tells you a lot about his character. And then his whole donut speech, where in the middle of donuts, another donut with a whole. I'm like, this is just, I love this guy so much. So he would get my Mark Strong award there. Not getting my Mark Strong award for Glass Onion. And maybe this is unfair, but it's mostly because Knives Out introduced us to the character. And he, we know what to expect. I think they do a lot more with him here, and he grows and all that good stuff. But because I was already introduced to him, maybe that's why he's not getting my Mark Strong award for your Glass Onion. But again, this is another really tough call for Mark Strong Award. And you could pick anybody in this cast, anybody in the main cast, and say they're your Mark Strong Award winner. And I'm not going to think you're crazy because they are all bringing their A game. Daniel Craig, no exception. I like that. I mean, we get more of what we want from the character, but they continue to build and we learn more about him. His partner is played by Hugh Grant, so that tells us a lot about him that we didn't know before. One of many fun cameos in this movie. Andrew, I've got to imagine, after the success of Knives Out, everybody was like, hey, Ryan, I will play any part in your next movie. I just want to be a part of it. I get that feeling because there's so many little cameos here. Not to the point where it's distracting, and they're all used so well, including Hugh Grant himself. But I like that he has this line where he says, I'm not Batman, which is kind of funny, but he also lays out like his code, right? He's like, I will, show you the way. I'll show you the path. I'll lay it out for you, but that's all I can do. That's where my jurisdiction ends. I hand it over to the cops and the system at that point. Right? He will figure out the mystery, but he won't bring justice himself. He won't get violent. He won't intervene. He just figures it out. That's all he's there to do. And that is so cool. I mean, it's true in Knives Out. He did the same thing there. But to have him like explicitly say like, this is the role that I play, I think is really smart. And you've got this built-in template for 10 more of these movies, and I hope they make 10 more of them. I hope it continues on, but absolutely love Daniel Craig in this movie. We're going to talk about more about him as we go through the scenes. But my Mark Strong Award winner, and this was tough. I'm going to gush about every single one of these people, I promise you. But I'm going to give it to Janelle Monáe, playing the dual role of Cassandra Brand and her twin sister, Helen Brand, which is a twist that comes relatively late in the movie. But the reason I'm going with her, I mean, she kills it, but she has like 3 different layers and she nails all of them. There's the cool, calm, collected, sexy Cassandra Brandt, Annie, right? There's that character.
Yeah, Andy.
Andy, yeah. And then there's her twin sister, Helen, who's just a simple Southern girl, completely different mannerisms and accent and everything. And then there is Helen playing Andy, which is this extra layer where she's putting on a performance, and she's got the scenes where she drinks for liquid courage, which plays an important part in the story and everything. And she nails every single layer of it. She is hilarious. She's funny, and she nails every aspect of her character, and a lot is being asked of her. It's the main reason she's getting my Mark Strong award. I think the script is asking just a lot from her, and she absolutely nails it. Personally, I didn't know who she was. I believe she. I'll cut this. I think her pronouns are they them. I didn't know who they were going into this movie. Apparently, a pretty big deal for their music, though. I think it has like 10 Grammy Awards I saw on her Wikipedia. My friend of the show, my wife, actually in the car today, we were talking about this movie, and she played some of her songs, and good stuff. Good modern pop music that I really enjoy. I know they had a part in Hidden Figures. I didn't see that movie, but they were praised for their performance there. So just an insanely talented person. And as I read more and more about them, has really done a lot for the visibility of non-binary people and pansexual people, and normalized a lot of otherwise marginalized group of people. So I'm just in awe of their talent and bravery. Absolutely killed it in this movie. Mark Strong Award winner.
Can't disagree with you at all here. It's a great pick. Like I said, she's basically got 3 different roles that she's doing here. Like you said, the final twist of it all kind of comes very kind of halfway through the movie. One thing we'll talk about it more later. I had no idea how long this movie was going in, and as I got out of it, I was like, how long? How long it was never occurred to me. The time just went by so fast. I never had a moment to stop and be like, man, this is running long, or any of that.
It's like 2 hours and 20 minutes, I think.
Yeah, it's not short.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like it drags at all. We've often kind of lamented over 2-hour movies on this podcast, and do they earn it? I think is the question.
Yeah.
This movie absolutely
is it necessary? Like, And, we talked about it a lot with James Bond, where like the James Bond movies are like required to be 2.5 hours.
Yes,
and sometimes it definitely feels like it. But no, she's doing a fantastic job here. When they announced her for the cast, I was like, that's probably going to be a standout. To be fair, like I said, everybody's a standout. And this is, like I said, fantastic performance. 3 different layers. An integral part of the plot. It turns out, we'll talk about it more as we go through the plot. But, her and Blanc are setting up this big their kind of almost sting operation to figure out who the killer is. And it's fantastic. I love it, and she's fantastic. She is a big part of why this movie works. Her chemistry with Craig is particularly fantastic. And again, you're just talking about can you capture that lightning again? Because the Craig Anna de Armas relationship in the first one was a big keystone of that movie. Like, can you do something like that? And with Janelle and Craig, you kind of get not the same thing, but something that captures a different kind of lightning in that bottle, arguably. I mean, how many times is he going to succeed before we just succeed? Just to admit that he's good at this versus lightning in a bottle. But this dude keeps catching lightning in a bottle to the point that you got to think it's not a secret.
Rian Johnson, I am the bottle.
I am the bottle. She's great. I can't say enough good things about her performance. She, like you said, it's something that kind of evolves over the course of the movie. For the first half, you're thinking she's Andy, so she's kind of cold and aloof, but then we get our big twist, and you realize there's multiple layers of the character here. Some of the twists or some of the hints from earlier come back to pay off, and it's fantastic. Can't fault anyone for picking her as a Mark Strong, or can't fault anyone for picking them as the Mark Strong. Great pick.
Now, as we go through this cast, like I said, I didn't watch trailers. I knew that GIF, I knew the poster, but I really didn't read up a lot on this movie because I knew I was going to see it, and I didn't want to, save as much surprise as possible. So I knew some of this casting, but either one, I forgot about him, or two, they ended up playing a much larger role than I anticipated. Edward Norton is in this movie. I had no idea he was going to be in this movie. So when he shows up, I was like, is that Edward Norton? And the
It
way
is.
the movie's playing out at the time, I think that he's not going to be in the movie very long, but he's in the movie the entire time. He's one of the main players. But Edward Norton plays Miles Braun, the tech billionaire of the movie.
Elon Musk, folks.
So here's the thing, Andrew. Early on in this movie, like the first scene, they're talking about him before we get introduced to him. And the puzzle boxes and the wild ideas and the, is he crazy or a genius? What's the difference? There was a part of me, and I got to apologize to Rian Johnson, but a part of me was like, is this going to be like pro billionaire? Is this going to be like, oh, they're actually mad geniuses who earned their wealth? I'm sorry, Rian Johnson. You have the complete opposite message in this movie, which I was so happy to see. We talk about the layers of a Rian Johnson script, and Knives Out on the surface as a murder mystery is extremely satisfying. It's a wonderful movie. Beyond that, there is a social commentary about racism in America and classism, among other things. And it works, and it's compelling, and it's funny, and it's sharp and witty, and that extra layer is really what puts that movie over the top for me. This movie is doing that again, but this time it's about the billionaire class, right? The fact that the billionaire of this movie is an absolute moron, so much so that him being a moron plays into the plot of the movie, is telling you all you need to know. The only reason he's a billionaire is because he screwed over other people and stole their ideas and acted like they were him. Yeah, he's Elon Musk. You're absolutely right, Andrew.
Especially at the end when like the big reveal comes and he's like, this guy's an idiot. Like I was like, yeah, it's Elon Musk. That's right. And like that's like I said, like at the time this was being written and made, like, yeah, Elon Musk was out there and everybody was kind of over him. But like I feel like especially with his whole Twitter takeover lately and the stuff that's been happening, it's even more relevant now than it would have been when he wrote it, which makes it all the funnier to me. But yeah.
I hope that Elon Musk tweets that like he loved this movie or something, like oblivious to the commentary. Remember when Parasite came out and like all these rich people in Hollywood were like, oh yeah, it's a wonderful film. And it's like, guys, I don't know if you know this.
It's making fun of you. Guys, you're not going to believe this.
I love Edward Norton. Throughout his career, I mean, Fight Club, Death to Smoochie, you name it. Even if the movie around him isn't working, I always love his performance. I'm talking about the Incredible Hulk, but I like Edward Norton a lot, and he's great here. I like that he definitely has to have a sense of humor about himself to play this type of character, who's again just an absolute moron, but wonderful addition to the cast. Great stuff.
Yeah, he like makes up words like there, and it's a thing throughout the movie that like if you listen to him, like you can clearly tell this guy is just always hyperbole. It's always making stuff up. He's one step from saying like stuff like strategery. It's just like it's very, very funny, but it all plays back, you know, almost like that's a pattern in these movies. But yeah, it was kind of, if you watch those early trailers, we're talking spoilers at this point. The implication, you very much got the implication that clearly Edward Norton was going to be the one that got killed and we're solving his murder. And then obviously the movie takes a big twist, and that's not what happens. There was even a trailer where like they showed him like they showed Edward Norton like afterwards, and I was like, that's just a smoke screen to make me think he's not gonna die, blah blah blah. But he definitely does not.
Continuing through the cast, we have the wonderful Catherine Hahn as Claire DeBella, a governor of Connecticut. It reminded me of her character from Parks and Rec. I know she's not a government official there. She's like an advisor, but definitely fast-talking businesswoman in politics. Catherine Hahn, I absolutely love Catherine Hahn. I've always enjoyed her when she pops up, but here recently, because of WandaVision, her star power has really risen, and she's taken on some more high-profile roles, like this one here. She's an excellent addition to the cast. She is always hilarious, but here she's got her comedic moments, but what she plays really well is the fear. all of these people have this underlying fear of losing everything, and she's got just this great aghast look on her face several times throughout the movie that really sells her desperation. I think she is excellent at that aspect of the role.
Yeah, I think that's something that is happening throughout this film. Is as the movie goes on, we find out how dependent these people are on Miles's money. Basically, that essentially they are selling themselves out with this. He's the friend with the money, so like he's financing her campaigns because that's the thing is she's the governor of Connecticut running for Senate, so she's in the middle of a campaign, and not Miles is apparently the guy that is bankrolling that, and obviously it impacts the relationship they have because they're afraid of this guy. They're afraid of losing that money. They're afraid of what it'll do to their careers, and she really does bring that. Like I said, everybody gets funny moments, but there's this undercurrent of tension. Like I said, it's this group of quote unquote friends, but like when they're all in a room together, they don't feel like it. They don't. Yeah. They don't feel like they're friends. There's this kind of current of animosity, and that's part of how. And I'll talk about that later. But yeah, it's a great performance. Like I said, a lot of layers to it, and giving her a chance to flex some muscles that you may not have seen recently.
Leslie Odom Jr. plays Lionel, who is a scientist in the film, and one that I would say most closely works with Miles still, as he works directly for his company and has to deal with his crazy, is he a genius or lunatic, the most. And Leslie Odom Jr., unless I went through his filmography, I can't find anything that I would be familiar with, but the man looks very familiar. So I'm wondering if you can maybe pull that out of your hat, Andrew, where I know this gentleman from.
I mean, I think he looks kind of like Swerve Strickland, but especially in this movie. But
oh my god, that might be it. That might be who I was thinking of. Just real quick, another great performance. I mean, you're saying that about everybody here because the entire main cast is absolutely fantastic and also sells the fear very well. And he's the one that might be most considering turning on Miles. Ultimately, none of them make that decision until the very last minute when they're kind of forced to. But that thought process is always going through his mind. He's very contemplative in that way. But yeah, just another great performance in the movie.
It is. Hamilton might be a big thing that a lot of people know him from because he was Aaron Burr both in the two performances of it on Broadway and off Broadway, and then the film that was released of it. So that's one where I think people do know him from. I ironically remember him from the 2017 version of Murder on the Orient Express, where he plays Dr. Arbuthnot, and and then he'll also be in David Gordon Green's upcoming Exorcist film, which I'm still pretty excited about. But in this whole movie, I just kept like, dude, you look so much like Swerve Strickland. It's a great performance. Like you said, he's got that because he works for Miles, so he has a vested interest in Miles, but he doesn't want to burn the bridge, so he ends up going to bat for Miles and ends up kind of being Miles' surrogate. In a lot of ways, while not Miles gets to kind of be the aloof billionaire, Leslie Odom Jr.'s character of just lost it. Lionel ends up kind of getting the brunt of a lot of the frustration that people in the company have with his ideas, and he does a great job there. So yeah, fantastic performance. Great pick to add to the cast.
Now here was a real surprise standout performance. Kate Hudson as Birdie. I personally haven't seen Kate Hudson in a movie in quite a while. Looking at her filmography, she's worked pretty consistently. Maybe not as much as her heyday of the early 2000s rom-coms. I personally probably most know her from Almost Famous, but I like Kate Hudson. But this is probably my favorite Kate Hudson performance now. It is so good. And a big, part of it is kind of the, dumb blonde trope, right? She's definitely a little
Yeah.
bit of an airhead, but she's also stumbled into vast amounts of success and wealth, playing into the themes of this movie. And there's just this added layer of something most of us have seen and could probably relate to in some way, having seen in our society, where like she says and does a lot of horrible things, and upon realizing it because of the backlash, she's like, "Oh, yeah, okay, I'm sorry," and then moves on without ever really learning a lesson.
Right.
There's references there to that she quite possibly dressed in blackface for Halloween costume. She used a sweatshop for her sweatpant company, but only because she thought sweatshop means the shop that makes sweatpants. But ultimately, still probably doesn't really see the issue with it whenever she gets called out on it, and is getting bailed out by Miles, or could possibly be sunk because of Miles. But Kate Hudson, gosh, she's so good. She reminds me a lot of Toni Collette from Knives Out.
I was gonna say that's
Very,
the easy analog here.
Yes, definitely. And also possibly making fun of herself a little bit, because friend of the show, my wife, pointed out that she actually has a brand of yoga pants, which I wouldn't have known otherwise. But there's definitely a parallel to be had there. But Kate Hudson, as gorgeous as ever, as talented as ever, it was great to see her again. Like I said, probably my favorite performance of hers ever at this point.
I mean, yeah, I would say by a significant margin. She's getting some interesting layers to dive into here. But yeah, it's a fun performance. But again, we've got that current of like tension, animosity, like you said, fear to a degree, just because these people are so dependent on Miles for their livelihoods. And yeah, I can't say that I'm super familiar with Kate Hudson. Not watched a lot of her movies, but I think she's fantastic here. Yeah, the Toni Collette comparison was the easy thing in my head, where I was like, yeah, because her character in Knives Out is very like, yeah, she's built herself as this, influencer, but like she's actually kind of broke. She really doesn't have much to her name, and she's just relying on Harlan for everything. And so this is a very similar group of people, but it's a completely different dynamic, and it works very well. And these characters all play into that. But yeah, this is a fun performance. Like I said, maybe a little bit of self-awareness on herself. But yeah, doing the work.
All right. Now, for me personally, this was a huge Mark Strong Award contender. Big Dave himself, Dave Bautista, plays Duke in this movie. Man, we got to gush about Big Dave back on our Spectre episode. We've probably just found excuses to talk about him on various other episodes of the podcast. I freaking love Dave Bautista, and I'm going to say this, Andrew. I don't think I've said this outright before, but in my opinion, Dave Bautista is the best wrestler turned actor. I'm not even saying like his movies are the best, even though I'd probably agree with that too. But I think he is the most talented actor of all the wrestlers that have turned actor. He is the most talented at the acting part. I love him here. He often subverts expectations with his appearance. I mean, the dude is just built like no one else on this planet. But here, he plays into that a little bit, because he is a, quote, men's right activist that streams, right? And that's, his body build, you might not be surprised by that. We're introduced to him, he's doing one of his streams. I mean, he is just, he's a hack and a grifter, as those people tend to be. If Miles is Elon Musk, then Dave is probably like Joe Rogan, or maybe even someone a little bit lower stature than that. But they call him out on like, rhino boner pills that he, hawks to his listeners and stuff. And
there's no rhino in those pills.
Lots of stuff there. But we get introduced to him doing one of his streams. And immediately after, we find out that he's streaming from his mother's basement, and she puts up with none of his crap, and he is no alpha male like he presents himself to be. And again, seeing someone as large as Dave Bautista play that role is just, you can tell the dude just has a great outlook on life, great attitude, great look on himself, can laugh at himself, and so on and so on. So always happy to see Dave Bautista, a really strong contender for Mark Strong Award. I another one that I did not know was in this movie. I think he might be in that GIF, but
He is, yeah.
I don't remember knowing he was in this movie. And he's one of the ones I saw. Like, wasn't he in the movie a lot? Is he one of the main players? And yeah,
He is.
he is. And
And
he's the first one to die on
he's the
screen,
first
which we'll
one
talk
to die.
about more in scenes. But that was also a crazy twist. But Big Dave, gotta love him.
Big Dave. Yeah, I love Big Dave. And I was about to do the why would you say something so controversial yet so brave about Dave being the best wrestler turned actor, but I don't particularly think that's a stretch. Like, I enjoy plenty of John Cena performances and Rock performances, but I think they're just playing on shades of the same thing. Dave feels like one of the few that, this is going to sound backhanded, can actually act. Like,
Sure.
there's more than one character that Dave is capable of playing. With John Cena and The Rock, it always kind of feels like you're getting a version of the same thing. And that's not, watch all of John Wayne's movies back to back to back. He's John Wayne in every single one of those, still one of the biggest film stars of all time. But with Dave, I think you really get layers to performances, you get different performances. You can, like I said, go back to our Spectre episode, you'll hear us go on and on about Big Dave and everything he's capable of. But I do love him here. He's, like you said, he begins with this stream where he's talking about the breastification of America or the American male, and it goes downhill from there. But he ends up being an important part of the plot. And like you said, he ends up being the first person we see die on screen. And that I didn't see that coming. Genuinely, honestly, I was shocked. Because I was, again, the way the movie is building, you're just expecting Miles to die. You're waiting for it. But the movie perfectly seeds and sets up. This is not a subversion for the sake of subversion type thing. It sets up and follows through on why it is that Dave's character, ends up being the one that dies. But I love Big Dave. I was really glad to see him and part of this cast. Apparently, Rian Johnson encouraged him to audition personally. They were like having a phone conversation about something else, and Ryan expressed, he's like, "You need to audition for this." And he did, and I'm glad to see him. Included. Glad to see him getting some higher profile stuff, because that was always kind of the thing that Big Dave wasn't getting. Versus Cena and The Rock are in these big, massive blockbusters, and Dave's had Guardians, but he's not the star there. He's just part of an ensemble. So to get him kind of edging up, getting those big moments, and this is no different. This is a big ensemble cast, and he is pulling his weight for sure.
Jessica Henwick plays Peg. Now, she is Birdie's assistant who just works tirelessly to do good PR for her and cover up her many, many, many public mistakes. And she seems to have a stressful life doing that. She is off the top of my head, the only one on this island that wasn't directly invited. Maybe Whiskey as well, who we're talking about. But she just tags along with Birdie because she's always with Birdie. That's what her job is. And she pleads with Miles at one point. Like, she sees what's going on and how she's getting used, and she pleads with him not to do it. She has one of my biggest laughs of the entire movie, which I'll just go ahead and say now. But the end of the film, when Benoit Blanc is laying out the plot and everything that he's figured out, she walks in like halfway through him giving this dramatic explanation, and you see her in the background, and she's like, "What is going on?" Because she missed like the first half of it. Very good stuff.
Very good. Very good.
I was curious if I knew her from anything. I checked her filmography. She plays Bugs in The Matrix Resurrections, which is a new character to that film, one of my favorite new characters of that film. I really like her in Matrix Resurrections, and performance we'll be able to talk about in more detail probably in a couple of months. Hint, hint, wink, wink. But
what a tease there, folks.
Good stuff here.
Yeah, I agree. She also had a recurring role as Colleen Wing in the Iron Fist Defenders, Luke Cage, that Netflix universe there. So she recurred there for a while. I had a recurring role on Game of Thrones for a while as well. But yeah, Matrix Resurrections was the one thing I don't. She was apparently also in Star Wars: The Force Awakens. I don't remember her being in that, but she does a great job here. She's oddly invested in this too because her career depends on Birdie's career not tanking because she spent her whole life basically being Birdie's assistant slash handler. And so if Birdie's career goes down the tubes, that's her career down the tubes as well. And I remember what I was going to say earlier about Kate Hudson too, just like the way her character is like, how is her character introduced in a movie that starts during the pandemic? She's having a giant party. Yes. A ridiculously massive party.
Andrew, I didn't even put that together until you said that. Like, but yes, that is hilarious.
She's having a giant party. And she's like, oh, they're all in my circle. It's like, they're not. Like, that's not true. You know that she's just saying that. And then, like, when she shows up at the dock, she's wearing a mesh face mask. Like, she's stuck. So they very...
And when when they finally take off the mask, she goes, "Oh, I can breathe again."
Exactly. Like she's just completely vain, completely self-absorbed. But like, and Peg just takes the brunt of that so much. Like Peg is the one that wears the real mask, does everything, and it's just she gets some great comedic moments, like you said. Like that's a great laugh. But you can just see the strain that she feels trying to keep Birdie in line. She takes all of her phones. That way she can't tweet anything because she's afraid she's going to tweet something insensitive again. And just great stuff all around. So a fantastic performance there from Jessica Henwick.
Madeline Klein plays Whiskey, who is Duke's girlfriend, and she appears on his Twitch channel, and she's trying to build her own brand, which is why she picks up with the stuff that Duke puts her through. There's an interesting subplot with her where we see her romantically involved with Miles as well. And it's not exactly what it looks like, but it's still kind of what it looks like. There's some layers to that. But she is, of the main cast, she's probably the one that gets the least to do. And I'm not saying that she's not well written and doesn't have her own arc. She plays her parts. But a cast this large, some may have bigger parts than others. She reminds me of Michael Shannon's wife from Knives Out, who is part of the main cast, but doesn't quite have the involvement as the other characters. She reminds me of that role. But definitely a few key scenes, a few standout moments. I like whenever she says, "I am a Taurus." And I like whenever she tries to shoot Andy, or Helen, with a spear gun. And it kind of comes out of nowhere. But definitely making the most of what she does have, and a great addition to the cast, of course.
Absolutely, yeah. She's kind of the unknown. Reminded me a little bit of what was her name? Catherine Langford in the first one, where there's a role, there's a part, there's an interaction with the rest of the cast, but ultimately is kind of secondary, which is, it's not uncommon. It's like I said, it's the nature of an ensemble cast. And she's kind of one of the more unknowns of the cast as well. Everybody else to this point has kind of been a heavy hitter, with kind of Jessica Henwick and Madeline Klein kind of being the kind of newer people to the table. But they both pull their weight. Like I said, the relationship between Whiskey, Duke, and Miles is very strange. Like, it looks like Whiskey is cheating on Duke with Miles, but then you kind of find out that Duke wants her to do it so that Miles will help promote him on his news pages, or put him on his news channel so that he can get a little bit more famous. It's a weird layered thing. Because originally it looks like there's just infidelity and that's Duke's motivation, but it turns out there's a lot more going on. Because of course there is. There's always more going on than it looks like, because that is the nature of a murder mystery. But she was a great addition to this cast, and she did a good job.
Those are our key players. But Andrew, you mentioned Daryl earlier. We got to talk about Daryl, who I'm looking at the cast list. His name is spelled Derol. No reason for that.
I gotta watch the credits, see if that's true.
Played by Noah Segan, who I didn't realize till kind of looking into this, plays Trooper Wagner in Knives Out, which makes, Andrew, it makes so much sense, because ultimately, we'll talk about his role here, but ultimately, he's inconsequential to the movie and just there for laughs. And as Trooper Wagner, he's really just there to react to other people figuring stuff out. Like, whoa, that's so good. How'd you do that? He's not, doesn't actually do anything to help solve it. He's just like a hype man for the other detective and for Benoit
Basically,
Blanc,
yeah.
uh, which is it's just hilarious. Here, you see him like walking through the background of scenes. He's like, "Oh, pretend I'm not here." He's just on Miles Island because he's going through some things and he's hiding out there.
Yep.
Pops up throughout the movie, always a laugh. Just a red herring, which you have to have in your murder mystery, right? You're wondering, like, okay, is he gonna die? Is he gonna be the killer? What's more? How is he connected? It never
Nothing.
happens. It never comes. But every time, literally every time he's on screen, it got a laugh out of me.
Yeah, I agree too. Every time, especially when they accidentally like bust into his room, and he's just like, and like the person runs back out, and he's like, "No, don't hang out. It's fine." But Noah Segan's another one of Rian Johnson's longtime collaborators. He also was in Brick. So since Brick, basically Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Noah Segan kind of always appear in his movies in some way. Pretty much, no exception here. I'll just go ahead and give it a shout out. Joseph Gordon-Levitt voices Miles Clock, the hourly dog. So that is Joseph Gordon-Levitt's cameo in this movie.
Also, a
Playing
voice
his
only
part.
cameo in Knives Out. He was the detective.
Yes.
You only hear.
There's
on
actually
phone.
several. There's several of Ryan's later movies that Joseph Gordon-Levitt only does a voice cameo for, just because he's got his own stuff going on,
He's
folks.
a busy guy.
He is. I remember Third Rock from the Sun. When's that reboot coming or reprisal coming? Want more John Lithgow in my life, but yeah, this is a funny performance. Noah Segan, ironically, also being the only other actor from Knives Out to return in some way. There was something I heard a lot of people say, and they wanted like there to be some kind of update on like Marta or the Thrombies, and I was like, I don't want that to be this movie. Like those characters are done; they're finished. They don't need to come back. I don't need more of them. The end of that movie sets up what the future of those characters is.
100%.
You don't need to see more of it. And so I wouldn't have been like turned off by it, but like I didn't think it was necessary. Just because, again, like, you know, you finish reading like Murder on the Orient Express, and then I go to read Cards on the Table. I'm not just like, oh man, I hope we find out what happened to everybody from. I don't want that. I don't care. Like, for lack of a better word. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, Anna de Armas and that cast were fantastic. Did a great job. Made those characters very, very layered and interesting. But I just don't need to go back. So, and Noah Segan coming back, I think that had been rumored, and I was kind of like, I can't imagine he's playing. Like, why would Trooper Wagner be there? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And it turns out he's just playing somebody else. Because you know what? Acting.
There are so many cameos in this movie. I think we should just go ahead and shout them all out right now because we might not remember to get back to them as we go through scenes. So real quickly here, Ethan Hawke shows up before they get on the boat, which he steps out of the car. He's got this ridiculous like little ponytail, and I love Ethan Hawke. I recognize him immediately.
Yeah,
like, oh my god, Ethan Hawke is in this movie. And again, I'm wondering every time I'm introduced somebody, do they have a major part? Oh well, he's like Miles' assistant. He's got to be in this movie. No, he's just in this one scene. And what he does, I'll just say, he cures COVID.
Apparently, yeah.
He sprays something into each of their mouths and says, okay, you're good. We don't need to wear a mask anymore. You're good. And that's it. And then it's really just a way for our actors not to have to be masked up the rest of the movie, I guess. Which there's other ways you could have done it, but they chose to do it this way. It's like I said earlier, like you could have taken the pandemic out of this movie and still made it work. It plays into some important parts like, you know, Benoit Blanc state of mind and stuff. But that was clearly just a way to be like, all right, we've established pandemic, COVID, mask, let's move on. And what's funny is when that scene plays out, when you're first watching it, you're like, oh, wow, Miles is so rich that he has the freaking cure for COVID, or at least a vaccine for COVID before anyone else. But at the end of the movie, you're thinking that was probably just like a breath freshener. Like he probably
like it was probably nothing. Yeah, I definitely had that thought as well.
I mentioned Hugh Grant cameos. It's telling me his name is Philip. I can't recall if he says his name out loud, but he lives with Blanc, officially a domestic partner is what Wikipedia calls him. You can draw your own conclusions from there, but Hugh, just such a well used cameo. He has like one line. He enters the door and calls out to Benoit Blanc. But when he enters the door and he's got like that apron on, like he's been baking, and it's just Hugh Grant's beautiful face, just perfect usage of a cameo. Like all these cameos are so well done.
Yeah, I do want to shout out the next ones if you don't mind,
Go for it.
just because I loved the scene. So Benoit's introduction in this movie, it's not my favorite scene, so I won't come back to it. But he is in the bath, and it turns out he is quite horrible at playing Among Us. That was I laughed so much. He has there's a recurring gag with him that he hates dumb, simple games like Clue and Among Us because he's going to rooms and ticking boxes. It's nonsense. But in that sequence, we get 4 cameos that are all funny for different reasons. One, obviously, is Stephen Sondheim. Rest in peace. This was his final role released after his death. Stephen Sondheim, Benoit Blanc is heard singing one of his lines in Knives Out when he's sitting in the car waiting for Marta. But Stephen Sondheim also notably co-wrote The Last of Sheila, which is a murder mystery that I love from the 70s. You would probably see a lot of common DNA. The premise of that movie is a wealthy film executive type named Clinton, played by James Coburn, who assembles his group of friends for a weekend of murder mystery party games. You may see some like the scene where they're all on the boat and they turn their heads. That's all very similar iconography, but that movie is also stacked. It's got James Coburn, it's got Richard Benjamin, Ian McShane in the 70s. It's so weird seeing young Ian McShane. Dan Cannon, James Mason, it's really stacked. So Stephen Sondheim here has a couple of different layers to why he's appearing here, and I just think it's fun. Obviously, again, as his last role. Next is Angela Lansbury, obviously known for many people for Murder, She Wrote. This would also turn out to be her final role released after her death. He was talking about it in an interview, and it was very funny because he was like, she didn't really understand the scene. And now knowing that it was about Among Us, I completely understand why Angela Lansbury was confused about it. And the other two are a little bit, but I love Murder, She Wrote. It's a comfort show for me. Just again, classic old lady solves murder mysteries. You can definitely see why Rian Johnson would have wanted her to be a part of this. And then the other two, one is Natasha Lyonne, she's fantastic. But she will be the star in Rian Johnson's upcoming television show Poker Face, another mystery show that he's doing for Peacock. And then the last one is just Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Yeah, who's just an airline pilot. So like, why? Yeah.
Why would you? I don't understand. I don't know why you would put him here. He just flies planes very badly, I might add. But he's actually written several mystery novels of his own about Mycroft Holmes with Anna Waterhouse. So he's written, I think, 4 or 5 of those. And so he's his own mystery writer in his own little way. So he was included as well. And so that was a scene that was just so fun, just all the different characters coming together, especially with it being Sondheim and Lansbury's last roles. It's kind of fitting that Angela Lansbury's last role ended up being in another murder mystery and just a fun little cameo. So all of those were really fun. That scene was just a blast to me.
All appearing as themselves, as well as Yo-Yo Ma, who is at the big party that we were talking about earlier, and recognizes as part of the puzzle box, I believe his own song, but they never say like he's Yo-Yo Ma. Wow, his name hard to say. I don't think they explicitly say he's Yo-Yo Ma in the movie, but if you know, you know. And it adds extra layer of comedy. And then Serena Williams has a very funny cameo where 2 characters are talking in a gym on the island, and GYM, in case you're confused, in a gym on the island. And her picture is just on the screen, but then she starts talking directly to them. She's like, "Hey, are y'all going to do a workout or what?" Like she was hired to do a virtual workout. And like, "Oh, no, we're good." And then she just goes back to reading her book on the screen, which was a very funny commentary on abundant wealth and what the wealthy can do, and just a funny place for her to join in. Okay, Andrew, that's enough. Let's talk about the scenes of this movie. Let's jump into it. This movie that we both very much enjoyed. What we're going to do now is highlight the best scene of the film, or at least our personal favorite. Another very tough decision. But Andrew, go ahead and kick us off. When is this movie firing on all cylinders, and what is your favorite scene in Glass Onion?
I got to go with our final kind of blow off with Janelle Monáe. As she kind of, we had our big kind of detective reveal scene, but then this kind of leads to the realization that there's not much that Blanc can do because Miles toasts their only piece of evidence. And this leads to kind of a strong rebuke of Miles and his wealth, where Helen basically just starts going around this room and smashing all of the crystal vases that he has and statues and whatever have you. In just kind of an act of defiance, this idea that, you may have all this, but I'm just going to keep destroying your stuff. And it oddly inspires all of these people that have just been sycophants this whole movie to also kind of start rebelling. And this ultimately leads to Helen being able to essentially undo Miles' entire empire by basically engineering a situation in which his legendary new fuel destroys the Mona Lisa, which is a very strange thing to say out loud. But
if you had told me, like, for going to this movie, like, yeah, the Mona Lisa gets destroyed, the actual Mona Lisa gets destroyed, I'm like, how do we get there? How do we get from A to B? That sounds wild.
But I liked all of that because that's not something that's uncommon in these mystery novels of having the detectives solve the crime, as it were, but being unable to prove it. And it almost happens in Knives Out, like that same idea where he's like, you don't have any proof of this, but they're able kind of on a technicality to get it. In this one, we end up in a situation where the proof is gone. So we have to create a new situation of which to engineer his downfall. And Janelle is doing a great job here. There's a lot of passion in the performance, a lot of, all that anger and pent up frustration at Miles that the characters have comes through. And eventually all the characters realize that Miles needs to be put in his place. And they all essentially agree to turn on him and basically reveal and expose him for his actions in not just Andy's death, but on the island. And it's a great final cap to the film. It's, again, another kind of a strong eat the rich type moment that that the first one is kind of also held up for as being a good example of that. And I think it's a great story, just builds to its climax perfectly, and this movie is no exception.
Well, a great choice. I mean, I can never fault someone for saying that the final blow-off scene of a murder mystery is their favorite scene in the movie. I'm sure plenty of people are going to be agreeing with you. I really enjoy it. And, man, Rian Johnson's writing. Every single thing you see on screen has a purpose. It's a decision. And it all comes back into play. It all matters. Going back to Knives Out, like, you follow the journey of the baseball in that movie. Like, it plays a pivotal part in the movie. The fact that Ransom makes the help call him by his actual name has a story purpose in the movie. And in this one, I love that the character of Helen has never drank alcohol before, but she accidentally drinks alcohol on this island because they have Jared Leto's kombucha, which kombucha eventually becomes alcoholic if you let it ferment enough, which it has. So she accidentally starts drinking and discovers a new courage that she didn't know that she had. And Benoit Blanc slides her a drink. She takes that drink, and that gives her the courage to start smashing things, which leads to the destruction of the Mona Lisa. Everything matters. They're just so well written. I absolutely love Rian Johnson's scripts for that reason. And the Mona Lisa, it's funny because it's introduced fairly early, and it's behind a sheet of glass. He says, like, it's on loan, and he establishes that, it's got to be behind glass, but he has a button to lower the glass because he wants to be able to look at it. He's like, don't, tell anybody I had this installed. We know it's going to come into play. Like, it's no secret. We know it's going to come into play. Either someone steals it or it gets destroyed or the letters behind there. We know it's going to happen. But when it finally does, it is still absolutely satisfying. It is satisfying to watch the Mona Lisa get torched because you know what it means for the character. By the way, the character who has been saying that he wants to be mentioned in the same breath as the Mona Lisa, which is one of those things that sounds profound, but is really not. It really
Kind of
makes
nonsense.
no sense. But it ends up happening. What a script. What a just chef's kiss of a script. Again, everything matters. Everything comes back into play. That is what makes satisfaction in a movie, right? Every gun that gets loaded gets fired by the end. And Rian Johnson, just a master at that. And so, Andrew, great pick for best scene. I already mentioned, Peg's character coming back in the middle of the explanation, not knowing what's going on, just getting a good laugh in the middle of that. Yeah, it's awesome. However, I'm going to pick a different scene. I mean, honestly, it's the whole movie. I love the whole movie.
Yeah,
Andrew,
the whole
watching
movie
this movie, 20, 30 minutes in, maybe, I'm thinking, one, I can't wait to watch this movie again. I'm going to pick up on so many more layers. I know everything I'm seeing matters. I don't know how it matters yet, but it's going to be so rewarding on a second watch. I want to watch this movie again. And two, I'm thinking, I hope they make 10 more of these. I hope every 2 years we get another murder mystery starring Benoit Blanc from Rian Johnson. I already can't wait for the next one. But my favorite scene is going to be another big reveal. This is whenever what we think happens is we think Andy gets killed. She gets shot, falls to the ground, and then we get a flashback to when the two characters first meet. We get Helen meeting Benoit Blanc. Because like the first one, Benoit Blanc was invited, but we don't know by who. Another fun similarity between Knives Out. But we find out that it's by Helen's, by Andy's twin sister, who had committed suicide. But she doesn't believe she committed suicide. That's why she goes to Benoit Blanc, because he's the best detective, and wants to figure things out. So she's like, Andy got this invitation, you should go for her. And eventually they decide that Helen is going to go disguised as her twin sister, Andy. Which, what a fun trope in murder mysteries, right? The twin sister. And this is a great use of it. Now, what's interesting about the scene, Andrew, one is we're just turning everything we thought we knew on its head. It reminds me, one of the best things Knives Out does is subvert expectations by, it's a murder mystery, but we see the murder. We see it play out. We know exactly how they died and why. And so the mystery becomes something else entirely. Same thing here. We think it's going one way, it goes another way. And throughout the scene, what we think we're seeing is that, Andy died by suicide. That was actually Helen. And now Helen's dead. Like, what a tragedy. Like, twin sisters have died. So during this entire explanation of that it's actually Helen and she's learning to act like her sister, we think it's tragic. And we think that Benoit Blanc must have this weighing on his mind because it was his idea for her to go. And he tries to talk her out of it because it'll be dangerous, but she says, no, this is the only way. Let's do it. And then she ends up getting killed. I love how many twists and turns we have in this short amount of time. I love the flashback. I love the twin reveal. I love the sadness that we're in because right after this reveal, we find out that she's not dead. The bullet was actually stopped by her twin sister's diary, which she had in her pocket. And the blood that we saw initially is Jeremy Renner's hot sauce. Everything has a purpose. We get introduced to Jeremy Renner's hot sauce earlier. That's why Benoit Blanc has the bottle in his pocket, which he uses to make it look like it's blood so the characters think that Andy has died. It's not even Andy, it's Helen. I mean, saying it out loud right now.
It makes himself cry.
Yes, it's got so many purposes.
Oh, God.
And it adds tension because it's about to make her cry, which is trying to be a dead body.
Yep.
So good.
So good.
But in everything I just explained, like it sounds super convoluted. I imagine nobody listening to this should have not seen the movie by now. But if for whatever reason you just heard that and you hadn't seen the movie, you're probably like, wow, this sounds super convoluted. But it's all presented in such an intelligent way where you can keep up with it. It's smart, but easy to understand at the same time, which is just, again, not easy to do as a writer. So that scene is doing so much heavy lifting. I've got to recognize it as my favorite scene of the movie.
I can't disagree with you at all. This was a really fun reveal. It's kind of your you're kind of braced to go back and find out what happened. We get a similar thing in Knives Out. That's actually kind of what I like about the two movies, is that the murder mysteries, or the mysteries really, because the first one's, calling it a murder mystery is interesting because it's not really a murder mystery. The question of Harlan killing himself is not really in question. What's in question is the circumstances as to why. And you end up finding out that in the process, Chris Evans does kill somebody else. But he approached it very much from the Columbo formula, which is we start with essentially the murder and we work our way backwards. Whereas in this one, we're kind of getting that more classic, the tension is building, the tension is building, the tension is building. Then people start dying and things get out of control and we have to come back down to earth and kind of figure out who's responsible. And that's, there's tons of different ways to approach a mystery. And I'm glad to see that, we're not just you can change it up from movie to movie. And I think the movies are all going to be the better for it. But I like that here there's a mystery in the past that doesn't get revealed until later. And so we get kind of our catch-up scene here where we kind of find out that, Andy is dead. Someone has killed her.
Catch-up scene. Andrew. It's a hot
sauce.
Hot
sauce. Sorry. My mistake. So we get our hot sauce scene to, get us caught up to the current events of the movie. I hate you. But I thought this was really fun. Like I said, it got to show off the Craig Janelle chemistry. You got to see that they worked really well together. You get to see the plot kind of unfold, because that's actually the key at the beginning of the movie. Is Blanc is here, but Miles doesn't know why, because he didn't invite him.
Yeah.
But Benoit knows what the box is. He knows it had the puzzles on it. It opened up the stuff. He knows what it is. So clearly, Miles is like, he must have gotten one. So someone reset it, and like I said, you end up with that same kind of thing as the first one, where Blanc is here, but we don't know why. And that's the interesting tension throughout the first half of the film, is you think that, is somebody going to kill someone and someone else suspected it? So they've invited Blanc to potentially save somebody. Do they want to see if Blanc can solve them figuring it out? It's all very layered and it all serves a purpose. But ultimately, the reveal scene is great. She reveals because you do see Andy just break the thing apart at the beginning. Yeah. So you think. But it turns out that was Helen, who just didn't have any time for Miles' dumb games. And then that's what she takes to Blanc. And it all ties into the earlier sequences when we kind of meet with Blanc. He just gets told, hey, there's a box, and you don't see the context of it. But yeah, this is a great scene. I love it a lot. It's really, really, fun seems like a wrong word, but just you get introduced to Helen's character, you kind of get the crux of the plot, and then that propels us essentially into the third act, where everything is kind of going off the rails. And it's fantastic. Great pick, Chris. I cannot fault you for that at all.
I love the accents, too. So the most obvious one is Benoit Blanc, right? Who's like, right. It's a Southern gentleman accent in a way that I honestly kind of question how many people walking this earth today actually talk like that. It's an accent that seems more made for dramatic television, theater, and movies. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not entirely convinced that's how authentic that is, but it doesn't matter because if it's a character, it defines a character and it's entertaining. I felt kind of similarly about Helen. Hers isn't as dramatic, but we've seen her talk as Andy throughout the movie, and then you see her talk as Helen, and it's like Southern belle,
very different,
right?
Yeah.
And again, it you could probably find people in the South that talk like that, but it seems to be dramatic, like with a purpose, and I really like that. Where it's not so. I don't know if they really did a lot of research, like, from this region, this is how they would sound, work this cut. It's more like, we need you to sound dramatically different from Andy. It's going to be inspired by the Southern accent. Let's find something, as opposed to being set in reality. And I might be reaching a little bit there, but I feel like that's kind of the intention of those accents, to be so dramatically different from the way everyone else is talking. And in Helen's case, so dramatically different from how she has to talk as Andy. And again, I just like how dramatic they are. It just fits the tone of the film. But you bring up this mystery box, this puzzle box, which we see gets solved by various characters in the beginning of this movie. And we see, Helen destroy it. But it's established that Blanc's Achilles heel is stupid, simple, dumb puzzles and games. It doesn't make sense for him, right? He's all about real life motive and people and how do they work, and that's what he figures out. Whenever he first talks to Miles about the puzzle box that he received, we assume at the time that he received an actual puzzle box and he solved it. And he even like tells him, he's like, yeah, it was just some dumb children's games. I solved them, no problem. And Miles' spirit is crushed because he hired somebody to make very extravagant puzzles. And at the time, we're thinking, oh yeah, it's Benoit Blanc. Those puzzles were probably not a big deal for him. But now I'm wondering, had he actually received a box with the puzzles, would he have been awful at him? Like, do you think that like, he would have actually not been able to probably open it on his own?
There's a big scene where, like I mentioned it earlier, where like Helen is talking about Clue. She's like, "Oh, my little grid looks like a Clue board," and Blanc detests it. He hates Clue. He's like walking to rooms, checking boxes. He thinks it's a dumb, simple game, and so he very well may have been awful at those games because he doesn't like he doesn't understand. He doesn't understand that in Among Us, you can't do the bad thing in front of other people because that means they saw you. Like, it's a simple base.
But they don't know my motivation.
Yeah, exactly. So it's funny, and yeah, it's an interesting ripple that it did occur to me. I just thought it's like, oh, he may not have been able to solve these because he just doesn't like the simple mystery games. He likes the thrill. He likes the complicated mysteries. Yep.
Speaking of complicated mysteries, like we said, the easy setup in this movie, the setup we're expecting is like, all right, they're all being called to an island. It's a murder mystery party for Miles. He's going to get quote unquote killed and they got to figure it out. But he's going to actually get killed. The murder mystery is going to become real. That's what we're expecting. And it is obvious. But I still wouldn't have been upset. Like, I expected that to come, but I wasn't like rolling my eyes. Like, oh, they're doing the obvious thing. It's like, this is going to be fun. But that is not at all what happens. In fact, the moment that the murder mystery starts, because Benoit Blanc asks, oh, has the game started? And he's like, well, I mean, I haven't been killed yet, but sure. And he goes, great. And he solves the entire mystery before it happens. He says that crossbow is pointed at you. Here's who did it. Here's why. Here's everything I noticed on the way in. And Miles is like flabbergasted and upset because, again, he hired someone to write this.
He hired Gillian Flynn, who wrote Gone Girl, and the author of Gone Girl and Sharp Objects and Dark Places.
Oh, she's quite good.
She's quite good. Yes, that was again. I was laughing so much that just the complicated murder mystery that he got an international author to write was solved so easily. And then it also like it raises the question. Like for me, I was just kind of like, yeah, but like, did you just write a cheap mystery for the guy because he's not going to know the difference because Miles isn't the smartest person? But
I mean, it does seem pretty complicated. As Benoit Blanc is laying it out, it is complicated how he came to his conclusions, which were all 100% correct, and he ruins the game, which is just hilarious. But then it begs the question, well, what's going to happen? Who's going to die? And the movie goes on for a while without a murder, right? We kind of focus on other things, like the tension between the characters, and why do they not like each other, and what's the relationship here? And we live in that world for a while, but the tension is building when they're all in a room together. And I love the use of the Mona Lisa glass wall closing repeatedly with every noise. And you're like, someone's about to die. What's going to happen? And it's Duke. It's Big Dave who starts choking. And you're like, I did not see that coming. I did not expect him to be the murder that sets everything off. It seems almost random. Like, what is it about him that someone would want to die? And then he's quote unquote poisoned by his drink. We know he drinks something and that's why he dies. And so we as an audience are thinking, oh, they were trying to kill Miles and he drank it by accident. And Miles picks up on it. He's like, look, it was my glass. It was trying to kill me. And so that's where which in itself is a misdirect we learn later because this script is ingenious and always keeps you guessing, but did not see that coming. And then later we find out that like Andy quote unquote killed herself, but someone killed her. So a murder had already happened. So we've got like 2 murders in this movie, neither of which I expected, but it kept me guessing. I mean, I would not have guessed all the twists and turns along the way. Like we might figure out early on that Miles is probably behind it, but how and why? The movie needed to explain it to me, and it was very satisfying when it did. Real quick, Andrew, something I was curious about as watching this movie. Are you the type of person that is always actively trying to figure out the mystery, or are you more like an along for the ride kind of person?
I tend to be along for the ride.
I agree.
Sometimes I don't. That's not to say I don't notice things. Like obviously,
Sure.
there was definitely moments in this movie where I was like, oh,
Yeah. They're
that's
telling
probably
me
gonna be
this for a
important.
reason. I know that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's something that by and large though I like to get to the end, find my thing out, and then like if I remember the clues, great. But then I kind of like to go through it again and be like, okay, let's now see the clues. And the movie spells them out for you. It's pretty easy, but there's always other stuff. But like even like Agatha Christie's and stuff, I'm not like jotting down notes, just like who
Sure.
killed Roger Ackroyd? I'm gonna figure this out. But yeah, I like to be along for the ride. I like to kind of just live in it and then just kind of enjoy it. I don't need to solve it myself necessarily.
I I agree, and I think either way is fine. I think it's fun to try to solve it. It's fun to go along, but yeah, I want to see like how the movie's going to present things to me, and I want to know what the movie wants me to know. But my dad is the opposite. My dad figures out movies like halfway through. Like I've seen the movie before, and like I watch it with my dad to see what he thinks, and halfway through he's like, oh yeah, so they're actually lying, and they're going to kill them. They do this, and I'm like, how there's half a movie left. How did you figure that out? But
How?
my dad is really good at that. But he still loves the movies all the same. But I was just kind of curious at how exactly you you watch these. I love and again I can't wait to watch this movie again. Whenever it's streaming, I'm gonna be watching it multiple times for sure. And hopefully there's a physical copy that comes out at some point where
Yeah, I really
again
hope so.
I can keep watching it. But I like I said, as they're explaining things in the very end, they do a pretty good job of flashing back to like, oh, here's the clue that we dropped. Like, Big Dave, Duke dies from his drink that has pineapple juice in it. It's not even poisonous, pineapple juice. And it flashes back to him saying, oh, Big Dave, or not Big Dave, he says, Duke doesn't dance with pineapple juice, which means he's allergic to it. The movie told us that. We just didn't know it was
Yep.
telling us that. And it does that throughout. And that's what makes it so satisfying. It's like the clues were there all along. So it's not a Deus Ex Machina at the very end. It's like, we were trying to tell you, if you're paying attention, this fits in the world that we built. And it does that repeatedly. And I can't wait to watch it again to see even more things. You know, there's one scene in particular I can think of where I was like on the edge of my seat. I was anticipating something really big being revealed. And I love looking back on it in retrospect because it's whenever Miles is explaining to Benoit Blanc the secret, right? He's like, here's, you want to know the
Yep.
secret behind, this business? And I'm like, okay, we don't know what this business is, what it does, how he got his money. Here it comes. And he gives this pretty long winded speech about the infraction point. And that's when he disrupts something small, something expected. And then it gets bigger and bigger and you disrupt the system. And that's what no one wants. That's when people turn on you. And it's kind of a bunch of nonsense, down to
Right.
him being like the importance of the infraction point or whatever. It tells you nothing about his business, nothing about what he's doing. It tells you nothing. And at the time watching it, I'm like, do I not get it? Do I know what was that important? But in retrospect, Miles is a doofus and he doesn't actually know anything. And he talks like things are important and like he's a mysterious genius, but he's not. And so, of course, him trying to lay out some grand plan is going to make absolutely no sense. And I love looking back on that scene and just how ridiculous it is. And Benoit Blanc at the end pointing out how dumb he is and the words that he uses that don't make any sense. And it flashes back to him using words that we heard him say that aren't actually
Don't
words
make any sense. Yeah.
and him explaining anything. And it's just great. I love that him being an idiot is a central plot point to the solution of this mystery.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really fun, just a fun ripple to add to all of this. That there's just this. The center of this is essentially that Miles is an idiot. He's not actually that smart. He's basically just coasted off of the work of others his entire life, which again, a little topical, but that was just the fun the takedown of Miles by Benoit at the end of the movie is just it's a delight. It's cathartic for me in a great many ways. But yeah, this movie is just so well written. Like you can't overstate just how tight this script is. Like, and again, you kind of just start after wondering if the dude's really good at this.
Something to it. Something to it.
Apparently he's got some skill. And yeah, like I am definitely going to go see it again. Me and Liz are going to try to see it before it leaves theaters. Spoiler, folks, we're recording this while it is technically still out in theaters. It is in theaters, I think, through Tuesday. So we're going to try this. That's no help to you listening. But but Liz and I are going to go try to see it in theaters. She really wants to see it. So we're going to try to fit that in. But yeah, they've both stated, Craig and Johnson have both stated that Johnson was actually saying, he's like, thought I was going to go do something else after this and then come back to Knives Out 3, but he says Knives Out 3 is kind of the thing. Calling it Knives Out 3 feels very strange, but like the next Benoit Blanc film is like what's on his mind right now. So that's probably where he's going to go next. And Craig has kind of said similar. Like Craig is like, he's like, I'll do this as long as he keeps writing them. And like for Craig, I imagine this has got to be like great because like it's literally, it's not nearly as physically intense as something like James Bond. It's not a big bombastic blockbuster where there's a lot of action. He kind of just gets to sit and relax the whole time. There's not a whole lot of, demand or wear and tear. So he could easily keep playing Benoit Blanc for 20 more years. Like that's something that he could keep doing for a long time. Heck, if they stop making the movies, I'd love Rian Johnson to just start writing Benoit Blanc books for me. Just keep it coming. Keep it coming. I don't know how you got to do it, but Netflix has got the rights to the third one, but they're both making it sound like they'll keep going for a lot longer. And if we keep, 2 for 2 is pretty good. That's a tough thing to land. Like we mentioned it earlier, but just the pressure is almost Herculean in a way to like try to catch that again. To be like, all right, we're going to get a new cast, we're going to get a new group, and we're going to go. And we're going to try to do that exact same thing we did then again and make it just as entertaining with just as good a cast. And the fact they were able to do it is insane. Now, again, this kind of goes back. This movie pulls from a lot of influences. Last of Sheila is definitely something I would recommend people watch. Evil Under the Sun, which is one of the Peter Ustinov, Agatha Christie, Poirot movies they made. He did a couple of those. But those were very similar things back in the 70s. They did a bunch of Agatha Christie's that were just Poirot, who himself got recast a couple times, with this all-star cast around him, set in these tropical, exotic locations or these classic murder mysteries. And this one is definitely pulling from some of those more tropical ones, like Last of Sheila and Evil Under the Sun. And I definitely see a lot of allusions here to those. It's not just, it's its own thing, but there's definitely allusions, there's definitely hallmarks, there's definitely throwbacks, callbacks, whatever you want to call them. But, man, just what a great movie. Just what a blast.
And speaking a little bit more to the filming process and why Daniel Craig is one reason he's probably all on board for making them, is both films, Knives Out and Glass Onion, were essentially shot on location. Knives Out's a little tricky because it was shot in this mansion, but not every scene you see in the mansion is in the mansion. Some of it's soundstage and they stitch together different stuff, but a large portion of it was shot on location in somewhere in the Northeast. I don't remember exactly where it was, but the cast said that like they had to, like their trailers and everything were a good hike. They had to like take a short ride to get to the set to film. And some people, like if they just had to film a small scene, just stayed on set the entire day, so they're not traveling back and forth. And so the cast got to like bond by all being in the same location at the same time. Glass Onion takes it up a notch because it was actually shot on an island. So the entire cast was out on an island during the filming of this movie. One, that's just a nice vacation. And two, they get to like bond and build that chemistry in between scenes. And the movie is just all the better for it. So I get the feeling that just by the nature of murder mysteries, every movie is going to be essentially based around one location and have that same benefit of the cast being together out on location, doing nothing but making a great film. Before we get out of here, just a few things I want to shout out about the movie. I mean, every scene is great. I love it all. You can't go through the entire movie, but a few things that stood out. I didn't want to bring this up during casting because I'm not. It doesn't apply to any one specific person. It applies to all of them. But something I noticed is just the look of the cast. All beautiful people. The men and women in this movie are just all absolutely gorgeous. But they also look very real, very natural. Edward Norton's face doesn't look like it has makeup on it. Most of the women, other than like the makeup the character is wearing, don't seem to have excessive makeup. And there are a lot of people like in bathing suits and shirtless, and they all look very real and natural in a way that you typically don't see in Hollywood productions. And I have not seen anyone cast or Rian Johnson talk about this explicitly. So this is just me noticing in the movie, but I feel like it was an intentional decision to let people be their age and look how they look. And again, I want to make sure I'm being very clear about this. They are beautiful, gorgeous people.
Yes.
But they look like normal bodies and faces in a way that you don't typically see. And it was obvious to me in the best way possible.
I agree. You see a lot of Kate Hudson in this movie.
Yes, you do.
It's but yeah, I liked that about the cast. I like the look. I agree.
Any specific shout outs before we get out here on this episode, Andrew? Anything else stand out to you other than the entire film is great?
No, yeah, like I said, I unfortunately can't implore you to go watch it on a big screen while you can, because I think we're uploading this the day it streams. But just enjoy it. It's so many rare things for me. You've got that kind of modest budget film with a big cast, just having fun. Low stakes is murder mystery. That's just a really fun watch. It's just a blast. I can't say enough just how fun these things are to watch for me. Just because not just loving the director and the crew and the cast, but also just being a lifelong fan of murder mysteries. It's just fantastic. I can't recommend it enough. So if you liked the first one, check it out. If you haven't seen any of them, highly check them out. If you want some further places to go, like I said, I mentioned Last of Sheila. I mentioned Evil Under the Sun. The recent Brana Poirots are also good places to check out if you're interested. Again, kind of following that formula with it's an all-star cast centered around a murder mystery. The old 70s Murder on the Orient Express or Death on the Nile are also great watches. A more recent one, but I do want to shout out, I think it kind of came and went, maybe not as solid as Knives Out, but enjoyed it quite a bit, is See How They Run, which is a murder mystery starring Sam Rockwell, amongst a variety of others, that actually is centered around a performance of Agatha Christie's play The Mousetrap. And, maybe immediately and directly associating your murder mystery with Agatha Christie wasn't the best move, but I think the movie is still a lot of fun. And I love me some Sam Rockwell, so I want to recommend that as well. So plenty of places to go if you liked Knives Out and Glass Onion, but more importantly, start with Glass Onion and go from there.
And if you have trouble remembering those recommendations that Andrew just threw out there, hop into our Discord and ask him yourself. He's there, and he will let you know. The man has a breadth of knowledge when it comes to good murder mysteries across all media. You can join our Discord through the link in the show notes. And until next time, just remember that maybe not every movie is great.
But all movies, especially this one, have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Follow him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony. Thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.